I would, unmute all for a few moments so that we all can say hello in our own languages. And I will say go and you all can speak. So now is the time. Say hello in your own languages.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey. Yeah.
Hello everyone.
Great, thank you all. It's so exciting to hear so many voices, uh, uh, all together and in so many multiple languages. So let's start with the agenda for today. This is what it looks like. So we just started with the introduction and welcome, and we'll try, sort of method we wanted to use today, which is called breakout room session using the Zoom, and we will be able to do a quick introduction to what that would look like. Following that, we will talk about feminism, gender, and climate justice, just portraying, sort of articulating clearly the climate justice as a feminist agenda. We will have small break rooms, and then we'll move into the ecological masculinities, so unpacking the concept of what that means and how we understand this concept in the work we are doing. And then we will have, time and again, little room reflections in a group of 2 or 3 as we move forward. Then we will go into our introduction to our toolkit, which is being currently pilot testing in Sweden by our colleagues. And then we will come back to the bigger room as well. So that is what the agenda for today looks like. So before we start, we wanted to take a moment to introduce who we are, especially the MenEngage Alliance, who is organizing this webinar. So we are a network of civil society organizations who work in several areas of work, but primarily are interested or are doing some work in the area of transforming masculinities as a value addition to dismantle patriarchy and unequal power relationship. And in the screen, you can see our mission statement, which clearly outlines the politics of the work we are engaging in, so that we can, transform the patriarchal system by working together and fostering joint action in partnership with women's rights, gender justice movements. Just wanted to clarify, even though the name is MenEngage, we are not just bunch of group of men or those who are only interested in working in men, but it's more of intersectional group that is come together, which comprise of self-identified women's rights organizations, youth, child rights, LGBTIQ rights, and other social justice works. Next slide. You will see this, sort of where we are present at the moment. We are organized through 42 country networks and 6 regional networks as of now, and present in 74 countries. So, why we are organizing this webinar today is in 2016, we produced this discussion paper on men, masculinities, and climate change. So basically, while producing this discussion paper, 3 main ideas and articulations were very prominent in terms of climate justice to be seen as a feminist and agenda, but also to look at the impact around the environmental disaster or the impact of climate change or environmental degradation also disproportionately affects women and girls at large and people of other identities or most vulnerable and marginalized population, but also has a negative implications on men and boys in gendered ways as well, which are a bit different than directly for the rest of the population. And I think from a climate justice perspective, addressing the root cause of climate crisis also requires tackling social inequalities. And I don't need to go into that detail because you all are already aware of that. But I think, first and foremost, with the momentum and the discourse that's going on right now, we have better understanding that climate change is one of the most urgent global challenge that we are facing in the world today. And historically looking, the activists often led by women's rights activists and leaders and groups from global south actually have conducted a number of and series of political advocacy work and on the climate change, and to stress that the human rights of women and girls who live in poverty and in vulnerable situations and unsafe conditions are threatened by the double injustice of climate induced inequalities and injustices. So that's provides, and we have uh, these 5 questions really stood up as a part of the discussion paper that we really need to further engage with. And how we can work, those who are working with engaging boys and men, more intentionally share the spaces with feminist advocacy groups. How can we engage men in positions of power? And these are, not new questions. What about a child-centric approach to promoting sustainable development and research between to explore the link between masculinities and environmental degradation, and how can we build existing innovative areas of research? So you can find this discussion paper on the MenEngage website as well. So to further unpack, we have amazing facilitators lined up for today, from whom you will hear and who will also facilitate this interactive session today. We have Sue and Barratt from Institute for Gender and Development Studies from University of West Indies, who will touch on feminist ideologies around that. And we have Martin Hultman from Chalmers University, Sweden, and Paul Pulé from Chalmers University, Sweden, who are the authors of the book on ecological masculinities, who will help us to unpack this concept. And we have Vidar Vetterfalk from MAN, Sweden, who is leading this tools development on how do we really work with boys and men in this field. In the center is myself, Laxman, and we have Tom and Sinead, who is who are my colleagues who work at the Global Secretariat. So without further delay, I'd like to invite Sue-Ann to start. Sue-Ann, over to you.
Thank you, Laxman. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. Hello from Trinidad and Tobago. It's a rough time globally, and some of us are dealing with loss of friends or even family very close to us. But while some of the organs sleep, some of us still have to continue to try to be resilient and to cope with the challenges ahead. So we are all going to do what we can to protect ourselves now and into the future, especially how we're in a crisis. In the next few minutes, I'm going to be discussing basically an overview of how different feminist perspectives have understood, theorized, and even engaged in activism and advocacy, climate change, climate justice, and gender justice, and associatedly economic, social, and political issues that impinge upon justice. Of course, these discussions immediately draw into relevance masculinities because, speaking as a Caribbean feminist, we have long understood the intimate connection between all genders and how we are relational subjects. So I'm going to move quickly, of course, because we have 15 minutes to cover quite a lot. In the first, just to give you an idea of the focus and to make sure that you know what's coming in case my time runs out, we are looking at no climate justice without gender justice as a general theme of feminist considerations. So we see the necessity of mainstreaming gender as part of climate change mitigation and adaptation. So that is something to consider, and it's generally complex and complicated, but it should inform our activism, our research, our policy, our governance, our theory. In addition to that, we look and consider or reflect on the intersectionality of our approach when we consider human concerns. But as I will end, I will begin, we as human beings are part of an ecosystem. And so we are different and variable. I don't like that word different. We are variable in who we are, the privilege we experience, the way we're included, our status and selfhood, and these present different threats and opportunities to us, particularly in terms of access, opportunity, voice, and choice. So these are the things that I'm just going to elaborate on or summarize as we continue with the discussion. So fundamentally, I think, what is the significance of all of this? All of this reveals the complexity of the strategies that we have adopted and want to adopt and aim to adopt, and the struggles that we will contend with wherever we may sit, either as scholars, as activists, as persons of interest, whoever we may be in our societies. Each society will present a different set of complicated factors. Fundamentally, though, whether we're engaging in mitigation, which is a proactive set of concrete actions to lessen the effects, or adaptation, which would be our responsiveness to changes that occur and unfold, we must understand that this is a set of factors that are in play that affect people from different points of departure. And a major factor is gender and the associated identity positions of sex and sexuality, race and ethnicity, religion, class, ability, etc. So I want to start off this elaboration with a quote from Sherilyn McGregor, 2010. She wrote a sort of a summary of feminist research and feminist perspectives and research in gender on climate change impacts, on the impact of gender on climate change. The overarching theme, she says, in gender and climate change research is that climate change is not gender neutral, but has gender differentiated causes and effects. Nothing new, but we must be reminded because of the mandates that we're going to take up, or at least we're going to reflect on. All authors tend to contend not only that climate change will affect men and women differently, and those who exist along that continuum of masculinity and femininity differently, but also that women will be more severely affected by the impacts than men. This is the general position now. And why is that? Due to their social roles as provisioners and carers, nurturers in their communities, and in their social location as the poorest, often, and most vulnerable at the bottom of the social hierarchy, alongside children. So fundamentally, when we think about the impact of gender, we think about the impact on all of us differently, but we know that women and children find themselves experiencing particular sets of vulnerabilities because of the social, political, and power relations that are gendered. So what are the perspectives that inform analysis and activism, or can inform? I would suggest that there are multiple, and I'm citing 4 of them that pop up in the literature continuously, but these are not complete because you have all different types of perspectives that can inform how you theorize fundamentally, or how you approach fundamentally a commitment to end sexist oppression and a commitment to accommodate in an agentic way the different peoples in our world who engage with our environment. So ecofeminist philosophy or ecological feminism has contributed to the perspectives that we have come to understand as a feminist perspective to the impact of gender, or the relationship between gender and climate change. Ecofeminism, of course, examines how exploitation and domination of the natural world and women are at an interplay. But what ecofeminism reveals to us is how we find ourselves placed in this natural world, and how then do we approach strategies to account for that placement or positioning, and not in fact recreate, reinterpret, or reinforce some of the very challenges we are trying to tackle. Then, of course, materialist feminist perspectives, and I would add socialist feminist perspectives, draw attention to structural inequalities, looking at gendered power relations, the social and material relations of gender, and the correspondent inequalities and inequities that emerge through productive and reproductive labor. So we contend with capitalist patriarchy. And this capitalist patriarchy, which we are familiar with, especially if we have been exposed to feminist ideas or feminist theory, sees as mutually reinforcing class structure and both global and local. So I'm thinking about it in that way, and sex role structure, the social relations of gender, and how these then correspond, mediate, and influence our ability to respond to environmental impacts and our ability to live our lives. So a materialist feminist perspective is key. A liberal feminist perspective brings in that language of rights and justice. And of course, it is always in conversation with the two perspectives that I've cited before, because with a focus on rights, access, opportunity, and influence, and the capacity to participate, primarily of women, but by all marginalized groups, as well as hegemonic groups, must be part of a collective, intersectional, inclusive conversation. What is interesting about this notion of inclusiveness is to include, we often exclude as an automatic effect or consequence. So a liberal feminist perspective draws this as key to decision making. We must have representation, and we must have a recognition of rights, access, opportunity to influence decisions at the global and the local level. And finally, another, common or commonly referred to feminist perspective is the constructivist. And this perspective allows us to see beyond our own framework of understanding when it comes to gender, because it takes gender as a social construct, a primary frame that is changeable, maintained through social or cultural mechanisms, negotiated through power structures like patriarchy and capitalism and politics, etc., and frames our lives every day. We cannot then speak outside of this framing, but we must speak across to recognize how we account for the world beyond a standard that remains invisible and taken for granted. So values, status, standards, norms are produced and reproduced every day and used as a measure of relevance and significance. So a feminist perspective then says what? What are the connections and strategies that I would suggest we think about? First, that climate change affects all of us, but it affects women disproportionately, people of color, and poor people. Of course, a major part of feminist analysis and challenge and confrontation is confronting masculinism, androcentrism, misogyny, racism, and anthropocentrism. These are challenged, especially from an ecofeminist perspective. They are seen as key elements to broadening the conversation on gender and climate change and the connection between the two. Secondly, any analysis, any approach, any decision, any policy used for climate change and climate change advocacy must put gender as a central category of analysis and must not settle at sensitivity, but must aim for responsive and proactive strategies. Therefore, these strategies must not be gender blind, but they must then respond to the nuance of different experiences that are intersectional. So it must take a grounded perspective, establishing and developing strategies from the perspective of those with the most relevant lived experience. We want to talk about coastal communities and fisherfolk, then we need to ask fisherfolk, include them in that conversation, and those who have different experience of that industry and living in that space and place. Mitigation or adaptation must be designed to account for those structural inequalities, those gendered inequalities that I've cited before, ensuring that measures do not exacerbate these. And this is where the conversation, this is the point where it really gets broader, because sometimes we may miss it because structural inequalities tend to sometimes disappear from our frame of reference because they are so much part of what might say our consciousness. We take things for granted. Rigorous research is needed, and I saw in the working document that was cited as well in terms of masculinities and the effects of climate change, and more work. But it needs to be done to elaborate the multiple and varied connections between climate issues and gendered issues and how these mediate justice. So these summarize the feminist approach informed by a feminist perspective on societies. So I end with some recurring issues and necessary actions, not in terms of specifics to a country or social space, but generally that all of us should consider. First of all, inclusive participation. Who and how and why, and what will impinge upon the capacity to be present or to have choices, because these undermine or these reproduce inequalities, and these may, on the other side of it, allow for opportunities to emerge. So inclusive participation. Secondly, visioning sustainable policy positions is something we need to be thinking about. How do we vision this in a way that it has a lasting effect from short term to long term, from generation to generation? And accounting for whose perspective is this coming from, and what is, again, is the standard against which we measure human life and relevant strategies. Third, unmasking and mapping structural inequalities, which I suggest from a feminist perspective is the most important, because we have the social, political, economic, and interpersonal inequalities that impinge upon the capacity to either adapt or even mitigate or respond. And these must be unpackaged for particular societies and subgroups in detail in order to account and to be inclusive. The challenges of consumption patterns based on our system right now, we find ourselves in a situation where we see how these structures that frame and shape our world are so interconnected, necessary, and devastating when they don't work, and sometimes they don't work generally. But that's a different conversation, and I'm sure people have their views on that. And vulnerabilities in terms of race, class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, age, ability, and other forms of human difference. My last statement would be that we need to understand all types of humans, wherever we sit, whatever privileges we enjoy or not, whatever identity positionings we occupy, that we are part of a living ecosystem. And I think that you all would agree with me on this. And as part of that living ecosystem, we are constantly, from a feminist perspective, in reflexive inquiry, checking upon ourselves to see how we are attending to those issues that we have pinpointed, flagged as needing attention, and not reproducing norms that undermine our very progress. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Suan. That was a great beginning, and thanks for reminding all of us, to be really reflective on the power, privilege, and that we enjoy while we look at potential solutions. But also, that's something that is being called by feminist activists and movements for a kind of a mass intersectional social movements that can actually challenge the economic, political, and social systems that reinforce, perpetuate any kinds of inequalities and injustice. And in this conversation that we're having today around the climate injustice and inequalities, and that we need to look at addressing and find strategies collectively to address in a holistic manner, so that we can really address the root causes of the issue that we are discussing and looking at, which is again compounded by neoliberal economic systems, the patriarchal systems that are compounding this further. And we know with this recent crisis with COVID-19, feminists are again, and that conversation is coming up, that this neoliberal patriarchal system are not functioning. They don't work for equality and justice. Thank you very much for that. So we wanted to take a moment to take a pause and again break into smaller groups now. So there, we'll break into tentatively 50 groups now. And there we wanted to sort of do a quick reflection on what do I feel and think after listening to Sue Ann. Any quick remarks, reflections while we figure out the technology part?
I'm happy to say something, Laxman. Vidar, just this is Nikki,
Nikki.
independent consultant. I helped write the Masculinities paper along with a lot of other people, Masculinities and Climate Change paper. I think it was just so great to kick off with that discussion about the links between feminism and climate justice and gender justice. And I think she laid that out really, really well, looking at kind of the intersectionalities, reflecting on power, reflecting on how we need to listen to those people that we're working with. I mean, she covered pretty much everything in a very short space. I thought it was great.
Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah, from me too. I'm not sure how many of us are here in this section, but maybe it looks like just 4 or 5 of us, so I can share. Yeah, for me it was really beautiful and concise, and yeah, I could feel the directness and the inquiry that had gone into her sharing, and allowed me to deepen my own understanding of something that I'm very passionate about. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is a fantastic part of my morning, so it's really lovely to see all of you. There was just so much to take in with that presentation, and to really think about how there's multiple perspectives and ways of looking at this in terms of who we find as what our identity is and the identity of others. So I'll leave others to share theirs as well. Thank you.
Yes, Louisa.
Okay, you have never seen me because it was fortune that brought me to this forum. I am a biologist and forest engineer, and I've been working with politics of climate change for a long time. And gender has been one of my interests in the later years. And so it's been a whole process for me to learn about feminism and now about masculinities, which is something that we just started working probably last year on the ground here in Colombia. And while I was listening to Sue Ann, I was questioning myself about how hard it is to sell these ideas to decision makers, to make them aware of the inequalities. And when she said, we need to understand all kinds of humans and individuals, I thought, okay, maybe this is the way to go. Maybe they find it hard when we talk about groups of people, but it's not hard to understand when you talk about one individual and the particular situation of that individual. And then when you realize that that individual that has lower chances happens to often be a woman, then maybe that'll be a better way to do it. So after listening to Sue, I'm just thinking about like case studies, people, naming, putting faces on stories. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. So looks like some of our colleagues are still in the breakout rooms, and while 65 of us are here in the bigger group. So yeah, okay, until colleagues come back, we have a few more minutes to continue.
Hi, this is Sapna from India. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sapna,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes. Hi. I've just been thinking about the question that the previous speaker raised about how do we make decision makers care about gender. And I just wanted to share an example of how in this whole COVID-19 crisis, the moment you mentioned something around how COVID-19 disproportionately affects women on any group, there's this quick backlash and reaction that, at least doctors are there on the ground, frontline workers are working. What are you people who keep talking about gender doing? And this is not the time to bring up such issues. So I just feel that it's just so crucial to develop some mechanism that in times like this people think and people are receptive to the language and to the reality of gender, because otherwise we all know that we cannot address climate change crises. We know that we can't give a proper response to COVID-19 if we don't have a gender lens. But how do we sort of highlight the crucial and the importance of a gender lens? And I feel like despite all our expertise, despite all our worldwide experience, I feel that it's so difficult. And then when someone gives an example that, okay, what doctors are really doing the work and you are not, you really don't know how to respond to something like that.
Thank you, Sapna, for bringing that up. I think the next presentation will also actually dwell a little more into some of those elements. So it's a right segue then to invite Martin and Paul to come in for their deliberations. Martin and Paul.
Yes, I'm online. I can't see whether you can see me. It looks like my video is on.
We can see you. Please go ahead.
Great. Martin?
Yes. First, on behalf of both Paul and me, I would say it's fantastic to have this type of conversation, this type of webinar in these testing and very crisis times. As Suanne said also, everybody probably knows someone who is sick or ill or will be. But as we know, it's also on a bit more slow violence perspective. The climate crisis is a similar type of crisis, even if it's going to be played out on a longer time period. But it's also closing up. So, and these two crises are important also to maybe think through a bit together how they relate. I who talk is Associate Professor Martin Hultman from Chalmers University in Sweden, working with issues of gender and energy, climate change for around 20 years in various ways. And then my partner in crime.
Yes, Paul Pulé here, originally from Perth, West Australia, and working delightfully alongside Martin at Chalmers University in Göteborg, Gothenburg, and also very closely with Vidar Vetterfalk, who we're going to hear from. It's a real honor to be here, and I just feel very touched actually that there are so many people taking such an interest in this conversation. It's quite an honor and delight to bear witness to.
So what we're going to do is 4 things in this short presentation. First, we have said a bit who we are, and now we're going to say a bit about 3 conceptualizations of masculinities that we have come up with as a form of analysis of masculinities within energy, environment, and climate, geopolitics, and politics. So that's going to be up next, and then we're going to speak a bit about the content of our book, Ecological Masculinities, and the 4 knowledge streams, the 4 streams of previous knowledges and theories that we draw upon in that book. And thirdly, we're going to talk a bit more about and deepen the ideas regarding ecological masculinities, which is the kind of third conceptualization. And then we're going to speak a bit about what we call the shelter of ecological masculinities, where we can gather to have dialogues and discussions regarding these issues, dialogues that we are putting together in an anthology at the moment around this issue, where we have invited a broad range of scholars from all over the globe to discuss issues of men, masculinities, and nature and climate issues. Okay, so yes, let's start with the three conceptualizations of masculinities first. So the first one that you see here is what we call industrial breadwinner masculinities. These are masculinities embodied mainly by men and mainly by rich men in top of this pyramid in the society. So think about Donald Trump, or think about Scott Morrison, and think about Jair Bolsonaro. These men who tend to be, if not outright misogynists, they are also anti-feminists. And they are running this patriarchal pyramid that we are in today. And they are also many times climate change deniers. So they totally deny the science and the need for changing our societies and take this into account. And as a quite weird coincidence, at least Bolsonaro and also Trump in the beginning, I don't know if he has shifted now, it seems to, also denied the science regarding the COVID-19. And Bolsonaro, to my knowledge, still is saying that this is nothing that we need to care about. We just can go on as we want. But this form of industrial breadwinner masculinities also show up as embodied by what we call the coal face of workforces who are dependent on industrial modern society structures and the fossil fuel industries. And the fossil fuel who is 80% of the energy used in our global neoliberal economy. So this is the structures that we have today, and it's important that we kind of see them and analyze them. If we then switch to next slide. What has been going on for around 30 years as a response to the, not least the climate change knowledge, is what we call eco-modern politics, or eco-modern masculinities, or also ecological modernization. It's a way of doing politics to answer the climate science call for action by proposing various types of end-of-pipe technological solutions, such as electric cars or carbon capture and storage to take away the emissions, but not changing the structures. So you can think about Branson here with the Virgin airline company, for example, or Elon Musk, who is very much of this eco-modern masculinity, and also Arnold Schwarzenegger, written about him here. And then next slide. And then we have come up with, because these two forms of masculinities, industrial breadwinner and eco-modern, we think that we as a global community of individuals and the humanity as a whole, we need to be thinking along the lines of also finding masculinities that can be of good for the planet and for the humanity as a whole. So we've been thinking about and analyzing ways of being ecological masculinities as well. So this is an image of that. So next slide. So we have these three forms: industrial breadwinner, eco-modern, and ecological. And next slide. I'm going to guide you then through Ecological Masculinities, and the book that we have written and the content of that one. The content of that one is like 4 streams of knowledge. So we bringing the multiplicity and the diversity from masculinity studies, and also the focus on patriarchy and structures, and the need for having a pro-feminist approach. We then have the second stream from deep ecology, in which it is a need for us to connect deeply with nature, and also understanding the nature within us. The third stream that we build ecological masculinities on is from ecological feminism, and their various forms, as Sue-Ann was talking about before, and not least the ontology of material feminism, as well as developments within queer ecology. And then the fourth stream of previous knowledge we build ecological masculinities on is feminist care theory, and not the feminist care theory that was kind of essentialized from the beginning, but the feminist care theory that comes since 20 years back or so, that also recognized the caring possibilities in all humans, masculinities and femininities alike. And from those 4 streams, we bring that together to what we call ecological masculinities. What we have written about in our book regarding ecological masculinities. And we think of it a bit like a shelter and a process, and a way in which we can leave away industrial breadwinner and eco-modern traits of masculinities towards what we call ecologicalization, towards these ecological masculinities. And we think that needs to include awareness, education regarding patriarchy and structures and male stream norms, and we need to deconstruct them. We need to deconstruct the mechanisms of domination. We also need to think and talk and reflect about amendments, how we as individuals are the cost of what we do to others, and also ourselves, and make amendments for that, make changes possible. And then we think about modifications, how we can deeply think about to modify metaphors, thoughts, and words, and also structures, and behavior change, and payments, and work-related issues. And then, as a fifth part of this, we think it's important to nourish new forms of masculinities that could be part of a bigger change, both on structural level, but also as individuals. So next slide, if there was any more. So now I invite Paul to say something, just some ideas here in 2 minutes, and then this question can kind of be put forward to all of you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Martin. So Martin's done a really great job, I think, of giving you the theoretical framing. We also spent quite a bit of time thinking through the more personalized manifestations of this work, borrowing from and being very much informed by both of our exposure and study of feminist theory of the personal being political and the political being personal. And the essential piece that I would add to this is that there are, inside of the Adam model, the personal manifestation is very much one of actually connecting with our own presence in the world and how we move through it. This was informed originally by our understanding of deep ecology as a ecosophisation process, developing a personal ecological wisdom that came through from Race's propositions around deep ecology. that we then adapted to ecological masculinities to put forward 4 key propositions. And those 4 key propositions really are for each of us to recognize what zeal we have in our lives. And zeal in this context is that thing that gives us a skip in our step, that we're excited about or invigorated by, that gives us energy or feeds us, both maybe even literally, as in terms of the kinds of food that we choose to eat. But I'm thinking more broadly and metaphorically there. The second is
it's only 1 minute left, so you need to be very short.
Yep. The second is to connect with our superpower, or recognizing that each of us has natural gifts that we are here to connect with and bring forward to the world. The third is our hurts, and those things that have caused us wounds or upset that actually can help guide us or steer us towards a particular manifestation of our personal ecologization process. And the final thing is our wish for the world. And it's that the wish is that thing that was like, oh, I wish that someone somewhere somehow would just fix that thing. And those 4 things are embedded on the personal level within the theoretical framing that Martin has laid out.
Paul, got a message. We have 10 more minutes in between us.
Okay, all right.
Hey!
Wow, where did that come from?
I don't know. we can talk a bit more in between us then. That's
okay,
great.
Fantastic.
That's perfect. Could you say a bit more about the anthology that we're putting together?
Yeah, okay. Well, so
we kind of, the idea is that we, in this shelter of ecological masculinities, that we have kind of, that we have brought together theoretically and analytically. At this shelter, we are inviting all types of guests and people to come and have a meal with us. And this meal is the anthology that we're putting together. So yes.
One of the things that has been a lot of fun for Martin and I in our creating of this conversation is thinking about metaphors that will give us a bit of an image of what it is that we're talking about that we can all relate to. And so building a shelter on estuarine shores was what we used in the monograph in Ecological Masculinities, the first book. And what we're using as our primary metaphor here in the second book, the anthology, is an invitation to like a potluck. And that, you know, what happens on in a potluck, right? People kind of break away into smaller groups and have smaller conversations. And so we've got 6 sections in the second book, and those are basically like the different conversations that people would have at a dinner table within the shelter that we built on the shores of the estuarine shores of the 4 streams that we originally proposed. And so the idea really with the Palgrave anthology that we're working on now is to just give people a sense that there's actually a special place for a lot of different ways of looking at masculine ecologization as a process. We recognize that the language itself is problematic. As soon as you use the term masculinities, especially outside of the academy, people very quickly think you're talking about men. Of course, being gender trained, both of us are aware that there's a big difference between being about cisgender versus social constructions. We're particularly interested in the social constructions, recognizing that masculinities dwell in all of us. And obviously the way that they sit in certain types of individuals who happen to be in men's bodies, happen to be in the global north, happen to be primarily white, happen to be wealthy, tends to cause a lot more damage than the kinds of masculinities that can be present in all of us. And so that's some of the conversation that we've been encouraging in the anthology is, and that people have been talking from the lens of eco-criticism, so environmental literature, history, gender theory, and queer theory in particular, sociology, there's been anthropologists speaking about ethnographies that they have done. We've even got one chapter from a person who has written from the perspective of veganism, and another that is particularly important in, at these times with populism, the rise of populism and neo-fascism, around the impact of eco-fascism and it's the risk of it becoming present in this conversation, and how do we prevent that from happening, which obviously we would be committed to doing. So those are some of the conversations at the dinner table currently that we're about to roll out in over the summer, and the book should be ready in the fall.
We had one comment or question. If we could say a bit more about the three conceptualizations: industrial breadwinner and eco-modern masculinities and ecological masculinities.
Yes, from Rasmus.
Yeah, so I can just say a few words first. So these three build upon empirical research, both from me and previous research on these issues. But the industrial breadwinner conceptualization builds mainly on analysis of climate change debates in Sweden and in the world, in which I was a bit curious when I recognized that it was a group of elder men who stood out very much and spread climate change denial ideas in Sweden, but also in the world. So 2014, I started to really dwell into this. What is this all about, and how come this group of men tend to kind of deny or not take into account climate change knowledge? And then it seemed that it was a pattern. It was a pattern that they had positions within the industrial modern society that they wanted to defend. And I think that we are seeing the same patterns play out also now against Greta Thunberg and the climate justice movement, the youth-led and women-led climate justice movement. So it's a kind of a response in which you want to keep the industrial modern society and the patriarchal order as solid as possible, and thereby they go against climate justice and women issues. And then the eco-modern analysis, that concept came out of an analysis that I did first with Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2013, and in which I saw that, okay, there are a lot of men having very prominent roles within the environmental movements and within politics and within industry, who are taking these issues really for real, and they know that we need to take the climate issue, that we need to do something. But the only solutions that they come up with is solutions that are tech-based and new technologies, and also technologies that doesn't really change the systems, that they are conservative technologies in that sense, that they deal with the emissions sometimes on a system level, but still keeping the system intact. So for example, hydrogen and fuel cell cars or electric cars deal with the emissions from the cars, but keep the kind of mobility patterns as a system intact. Do you want to add something on those, Paul, or do you want to say something more about the ecological masculinities?
We've got quite a few new questions coming in, Martin. So just in the interest of time, maybe we just go to those.
I've had, we got some more time from Laxman, but it's
Okay.
only 1 minute left now as I see it. Or Laxman, do you have any?
Yeah, no, the point is, yeah, let the questions come in for now.
Yeah.
If you want to quickly address in 1 minute.
Okay, well, I'll do my best to just give an overview of my understanding of some of the key themes that are popping out in the questions in case we don't get a chance to come back, which is that ecological masculinities is really designed as a complement to stand shoulder to shoulder, literally, with ecofeminism. And in a way, it's actually an ecofeminist orientation into the men's space. So it's not designed conceptually to be different necessarily from ecofeminism, but to actually take some of those core tenets of the importance of gender justice and environmental justice being interwoven into the men's space. And when I say the men's space, I'm not just talking academically, I'm talking about the practice of masculinities in the world, everything from boardrooms to men's groups to the way that men function in heterosexist constructs. To basically take that language right into that environment. So there's a complementarity that's intended there, not a competition. I might stop there if that's the alarm saying that minute is up, Laxman.
Yeah, probably that was Martin's phone, but good. I think thank you for bringing this up, and I think probably to many of us, it's a pretty new concept in a way, and that really brings together different elements, the historical elements of how the economic system have been driving some of these ideologies behind, and potentially, how we as a area of field can contribute collectively in integrating the lens of what the roles and responsibilities when it comes to the way the gender roles around being a man revolves around on exploiting the environment, the structures, and sustaining the structural systems, coming all the way from the industrial system on approach and understandings to looking at really bringing the ecofeminist ideologies to deconstruct some of the ways men and boys relate to environment or other issues as such, and looking into how can men and boys constructively play a critical role in dismantling the system, the patriarchal systems being reinforced historically in a particular way, which is compounding the inequalities and injustice that disproportionately women or girls are facing historically, but also now with new ideas around how different vulnerable groups fall into the continuum of vulnerabilities within the intersectional analysis of different ideologies that have been evolving until now. I think there will be probably a lot of questions as well that we may want to engage, but I wanted to take a moment and allow colleagues to again go into the groups and again have a reflection on, and keep up with your questions, but also reflect on what did you feel and think after listening to Martin and Paul on these new concepts to many of us. So Tom, would you like to break us into smaller groups, and we will have only 3 minutes for this.
Hi Paul, this is Antika here. So I have been doing some work for some years on masculinities and gender and how it affects men. And we primarily work with young men. So this is very interesting for me to understand the intersection with the ecology and how it just demonstrated it is a part of our day-to-day life, and how do we sometimes miss it. So I think it was very interesting for me, and I would love to go back and talk to a lot of men and boys about it. So thank you so much. It was very interesting.
Thank you all. We are back to the bigger group. Sorry to interrupt. We are back to the bigger group now. Hope you were able to have some conversation and reflections among yourself. keeping our questions and curiosity intact. So some of the questions, so just a request, if you can mute yourself while you are not speaking. Thank you. So, some of the questions, those are coming up, may be addressed at the next part of the section, next section of this webinar. So with that, I wanted to invite Vidar to take us through the practical elements where we will go through an experiential learning approach on some of these concepts that we have been chatting and discussing so far. So over to you, Vidar.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. It's so exciting that we are so many. I work at the organization Men in Sweden and collaborate closely with Martin and Paul. And we have developed like a reflective guide a guide for groups of men to reflect on these things. What you can see on the slide right now is first one material to the left called After Me Too, which we developed during the Me Too movement when it came to kind of take care of all the interest and all the frustration. We had about 1,000 men coming to our organization saying they woke up by these After Me because of the Me Too movement, and they want to do something. And then we said, yes, it's good to do something, but let's do some self-reflection before we try to go out and solve problems. Men are good at trying to solve problems, but it's important we don't continue doing things that we have been doing all the time. We need the deep self-reflection. And that's 5 sessions in that material. And then we have added a material that also then includes environment and climate justice. So the reflections deepens. And it's very much the very base for the methodology is sharing groups. And that in itself is to break with stereotypes of masculinity, where you are actually practicing listening and self-reflection, and then coming to action and what we are longing for, what we want to do, what we are really deeply needing and longing for when it comes to human relationships and with the environment and the climate as well. So it's 8 sessions altogether, and we are pilot testing it right now. So this is also an invitation. If you're interested, it's possible to join in to online groups, or if you want to facilitate and own a group by yourself, the material is there, and we are creating like a community of practice where we are testing this, prototyping it, and trying to develop the material, learning by doing, basically. Right now we have it available in Swedish and English and Russian. I have 1 more minute, so we don't have time to try any of the exercises right now, but so I'm inviting you to join the pilot testing, basically, and we can do that, or maybe we can do it in another session coming up. We can take the next slide though, so I can share something. So one of the methods and ways of thinking that we are inspired by in the material is by Joanna Macy's work, the work that reconnects, and the concept of active hope. And what we've done is to add a gender perspective and a feminist lens, and masculinities. Yeah, I think it might be difficult to do something now. We want to, let's see, you're saying we do have some time? Basically, I think I'll just run you through the active hope cycle. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. It's basically focusing on the fact that we need to feel, we need to connect with the full scale of the crisis that we are in. We can't change the crisis and do the transition needed if we don't, if we try to fix it too fast without the deep reflection and actually feel. And this is a challenge in itself for men, because we're not trained in feeling. So that's one of the things we do in this material and with these groups of men. And that's also things that they reflect on in evaluations and the importance of that. The whole crisis of climate and environment easily brings up strong emotions and feelings of being powerless. This feels too big to handle. And there is a tendency among all of us, and especially among men, to avoid feeling that. Instead, we try to do quick fixes. So starting with reflecting on something I really love is a first step in the process, and it's about gratitude. The next step in the process is to honor the pain and actually feel how difficult this is and all the difficult feelings that comes up, and honor that, because those feelings tell us how much we actually care. And when we avoid them, we don't really get in touch with how much we really care. And when we do really get in touch with how much we really care, that's also a place where a lot of creativity and power comes from. And that's the difference between passive hope and active hope. Passive hope is focusing on how probable something is of succeeding. Active hope is about, if you love someone, you do everything you can, no matter how big the chances are that you can save it or not. You just do everything you can. You step close, you go into the relationship, you step into the ecological system, the ecological system that we are part of, and we do everything we can. And then we look at, what are we longing for? And what is my next step? So if we do have like 2 minutes or so, we could go into groups of 2 and share 1 minute each. One is listening and the other one is sharing. And you could, if you want, pick any of these 4 questions. Because we don't have time to do the whole process. Maybe I would like to invite you to think about, what am I really longing for? Now we are in a lockdown. The whole world is in a lockdown. And when we start up again, what do I really want to contribute to in, or even during the lockdown? Like, how do I want to be part of the transition that moves us in a direction towards gender equality and sustainability, instead of going back to business as usual? So what am I really longing for to contribute to? And what is my next step? How could my organization also include the care for climate justice into the work that we do? I think I just leave it that open for you to share 1 minute each.
So yeah, thank you, Vidar, for taking us through. And in the group I was in, it did bring up interesting insight as to how easily can we make those connections with the environment and the work we do. So I think, as I was typing on the chat box as well, we do intend to have series of webinars on this, including on follow-up some of the questions that you have put out in the chat box, we will take in, compile them together. But as an immediate follow-up, you will get an email, and maybe Sinead, if you can post the link of the, we want to do an evaluation of this webinar so that we can get your inputs for the potential next steps as well, and how you felt about the methodology we used today, even though we had to shorten some of the ideas we had that we would do today, and organize similar workshops or meetings online on the topic. But at the same time, we are also preparing for the global symposium in Rwanda in November. And should everything go well with the current crisis with COVID right now, we will find some ways of continuing our conversation. And at the symposium, should it happen, we will also like to create a space, dedicated space, to have a critical conversation on some of these elements, including climate justice and the work we are doing. And then, we will, based on the evaluation and your inputs, plan for the next steps as well on how can we continue this conversation. So CNED colleagues are saying they need access to the survey, probably if you can look into that. And then, there is a, as Vidar mentioned as well, possibility if you are interested to do pilot testing of the prototype that Vidar just presented, developed by MAN and Chalmers University colleagues, in your own work that you are doing. So that option, so should you be interested, please do reach out to either Vidar or us at the Global Secretariat, and we will connect you to Vidar and colleagues on that if you are interested in doing that. Someone has already posted Vidar's email ID in the chat box as well. And we, as I said in the beginning, we have recorded this webinar. So we will make this available for everyone, and we will put it out in the website as well as our YouTube channel. And you will be able to relook or share it further as well. So with that, once again, we all would like to thank you a lot for joining today. And it was such a pleasure to be speaking and be able to see some of you and hear most of you and listen to all of you in many ways. And we will continue with our conversation. And also a special thanks to our facilitators for today, Suan, Martin, Paul, Vidar. And thank you, Tom and Sinead, for the background support. And thank you all for joining today. You all have good rest of the day or evening, wherever you are. And be in touch. We will, and take care of yourself in this moment. And we will continue and find ways with your support on being in touch. Thank you all.
Maybe we can end by saying thank you in all languages as well.
Yeah, those who are online, I will unmute now, and we all say thank you, as we said hello in the beginning, in your own languages. Now you can do that.
Shukriya.
Casa, mama.
Dhanyabad.